The sun was sinking low as Tammy sat in her small living room, staring blankly at the television screen. It felt as though the world was on pause, frozen in time. Her mind raced back to 3 years ago when her husband, Bayo, had suddenly packed his things and left, leaving behind a void that had filled every corner of her life. She remembered the heated words they exchanged just before he walked out, the pain in his eyes, and the way he had slammed the door shut behind him. Tammy had never been so hurt, so deeply wounded. It was as if a storm had torn through their once happy home, leaving nothing but emptiness. Now, as she tried to pick up the pieces, she felt an overwhelming sense of resentment, knowing that her family had fallen apart. But despite the ache in her heart, she had to work hard to raise her daughter alone, determined to shield her from the pain that threatened to overwhelm them. The next day, Tammy woke up feeling a mix of determination and exhaustion. She forced herself to smile as she prepared breakfast for her daughter, Kemi. Kemi was 4 years old now, a bubbly, inquisitive little girl who deserved to feel safe and loved. As Tammy watched Kemi laugh while she ate, a strange sense of peace washed over her. But just as quickly, her mind returned to the events of the past. She thought about Bayo and the sudden hurtful way he had left. She still wondered if he chose another woman over his own family and why he had abandoned them so suddenly. Tammy tried to bury the pain, but every now and then it bubbled up, a constant reminder of Bayo's departure. Tammy spoke on the phone with her friends, trying to distract herself from the pain. But no matter how much she tried, the pain had cast a shadow on everything she did. Later that night, as Tammy was putting Kemi to bed, there was a loud knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat as she walked slowly to the entrance. She hesitated for a moment before opening the door, and there he was, Bayo. Bayo stood in the doorway looking worn and guilty. His hands trembled slightly. Tammy felt her pulse quicken as she took in his appearance. The man she had once loved so deeply now seemed broken, as though he had been through a personal storm of his own. She was flooded with conflicting emotions: anger, pain, disbelief. Bayo spoke softly, almost whispering, but his words seemed empty. As he reached out to touch her arm, she pulled back instinctively. "Tammy, I am so sorry. I made a mistake," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. "Leaving you was the worst decision of my life. I lost everything, Tammy." Bayo had anticipated the worst reaction from her, but he wanted to try anyway. Hi friends, if you are enjoying these African stories, finding them intriguing and thought-provoking, then you are a part of our growing family here. Subscribe, like, share, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss any of our new storytelling videos. Let's get back to the story. The next few weeks were filled with tension and confusion. Tammy found herself struggling with the decision to let Bayo back into their lives. She would sit for hours with a heavy heart, trying to figure out if she could forgive him, if she could trust him once again. She could see the way his eyes searched for hers, pleading, but there was something different about him now, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. As he tried to reach out, to mend what was broken, Tammy was overwhelmed by memories, both good and bad. She would find herself looking at him with a guarded heart, her emotions locked behind a wall of pain. Every step of his efforts seemed to bring back the hurt, the sense of abandonment she had lived through. And yet, there were moments when Bayo would show traits of the man she had once loved. A tender look, a small gesture that seemed to say he truly wanted to change. She was torn between her own need for healing and the desire to keep things the same for Kemi. One day, Bayo came to visit. He sat across from Tammy in the small kitchen, watching her as she went about preparing dinner. "Tammy, I know I can never make up for what I did," he whispered, his voice cracking. "But I want you to know that I'm willing to change, that I'm ready to be the father Kemi deserves." Tammy paused, her heart heavy. She remembered how Bayo had always been so good with Kemi, how he had loved her as his own. But could she trust him enough to believe he could change now? Was this all a ploy, a way to win back her trust? Tammy felt a surge of fear. She knew that if she gave in, it would be as if she was starting over. While Tammy was taking a walk around the neighborhood the next day, she saw Bayo talking with another woman. They laughed and hugged as though they had known each other for ages. Her heart froze as she watched, feeling a pang of jealousy and betrayal. Questions began to boil in her head. Was this why Bayo left her 3 years ago? Should she confront him? She was overwhelmed by doubts of why Bayo suddenly came back to ask for forgiveness. Bayo noticed her standing there and immediately understood what Tammy was thinking. He quickly ended the conversation and walked towards her to explain that she was an old friend he bumped into. But Tammy turned and walked away. Tammy was conflicted, her heart aching for the man she had once known. Yet, her mind was filled with memories of the hurt he had caused. She wanted to believe him, but his actions yesterday and from the past were hard to ignore. Days passed, and Tammy found herself struggling to decide on what to do. She would wake up with tears in her eyes and try to hide the pain from Kemi, pretending everything was normal when nothing felt normal anymore. One night, Bayo came to see Tammy. He knelt on the ground, holding her hands, his gaze pleading. "I'll do anything to make this right," he whispered, his words trembling. "Please, just give me a chance." She looked into his eyes and felt a sense of hope. The next morning, just when Tammy thought she had begun to heal, she received a call saying that Bayo had been involved in a serious car accident. Tammy's heart skipped a beat as she rushed to the hospital. When she arrived, she found Bayo lying unconscious, hooked up to the machines, his face battered and bruised. She stood by his bedside, torn between the love she had once felt, watching him with pity. This moment made her feel the need to decide whether to hold on to the past or to forgive and move on. As Tammy watched Bayo on the hospital bed, her emotions were tangled in grief, anger, and love. But seeing him so helpless made her heart ache in a way she had never felt before. It was as though Bayo's accident had awakened a different part of her, one that still held on to the remnants of hope, even amidst the betrayal. Over the next few days, Bayo began to regain consciousness. Tammy would visit him, sitting silently by his bedside, watching him struggle to stay alive. Each day was a test, a constant struggle between wanting to hold on to her anger and her desire to forgive. It was as though the hospital room became a battlefield of emotions, where she had to confront the truth of her own feelings. As time went by, there would be moments when Bayo would look at Tammy with regret in his eyes that made her feel sorry for him. During one of her visits, Bayo reached out his hand weakly. "Tammy," he whispered, "I know I've hurt you so much, but I promise I'll never hurt you again. Please forgive me." Tammy closed her eyes, holding back the tears. She felt the weight of her own pain pressing down on her. But something deep inside her was changing. She remembered the way Bayo had once loved her, the way he had made her feel safe. As Bayo lay asleep on the bed, Tammy was lost in thoughts. Should she take him back or not? Forgiving him might not mean forgetting, but rather allowing herself to release the anger and pain that had held her down. She knew that this was a journey she had to take for her own sake, for the sake of Kemi, who needed her to be whole again. Just as things seemed to be calming down, Bayo's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. The doctors couldn't explain the change, and Tammy was left waiting in an empty room, holding on to hope with trembling hands. As she sat there, a rush of memories of the best days with Bayo came back, flooding her mind with images of the past, from love to constant fighting. It was as if all those emotions were swirling around her, leaving her feeling dizzy and uncertain. She decided to hold on to the possibility of forgiveness as she watched Bayo fight for his life. She began to question if forgiveness could ever truly mend her broken heart. It was a question that haunted her as she stayed by his side, never knowing what would happen next. As Bayo's condition worsened, Tammy felt her world slowly begin to crumble. She would find herself talking to Bayo as if he could hear her words, telling him how much she still loved him despite everything he had done. She would share stories of Kemi, of the little triumphs and struggles that filled their lives while Bayo was away. During these quiet moments, Bayo's face would seem to relax as though he could hear her words. Tammy found comfort in these small connections. She began to understand that her pain was becoming lesser and giving space to something gentle. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but like an acceptance of all that had happened in the script of their love story. She made a promise to herself to find a way to move forward. Then, one morning, Bayo woke up, his eyes blinking slowly as he turned his head towards Tammy. There was a spark in his gaze that hadn't been there before. Tammy could feel a wave of hope as though she could finally see all she needed to see. "Tammy," Bayo whispered, his voice still weak. "I never understood how much I had hurt you." Tammy blinked, holding tears, feeling the weight of his words. It was as if he was speaking for all the lost time, all the years of pain that had built up between them. It seemed as though Bayo was truly seeing his mistakes for the first time. She nodded slowly, but she wanted to hold on to this chance of rebuilding something good. As she leaned in to hold him, she felt a sense of relief settle over her, and they both came to terms with the truth of their past. But Bayo's progress didn't last. Later that same day, his health suddenly took a turn for the worse. The doctors did their best to revive him as Tammy rushed back to his side, feeling her heart breaking once more. As Bayo clung to life, his final words were filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, Tammy," he whispered, his voice growing weaker with each word. "I wish I had another chance to show you and Kemi how much I love you." Tammy nodded, holding back her tears. She was broken. She had never imagined that things would end this way. As she watched Bayo take his last breath, Tammy felt a weight lift from her heart, as if she could let go of all the hurt and start afresh. She said her final goodbyes and left with Kemi. After Bayo's burial, Tammy grieved, but she found a new strength within herself. She was no longer trapped by the pain of the past. Instead, she was determined to move forward for her sake and for Kemi's sake. She took on a new job, one that allowed her to be busy without feeling the emptiness that used to consume her. She threw herself into her work, and slowly she found a sense of purpose. She made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and began to feel alive in a way she hadn't before. She still remembered Bayo, and there were times when tears would well up unexpectedly, but they were no longer painful. They were a quiet reminder of the journey she had been through, of the love she had once shared, and of the pain that had ultimately led to her healing. One day, Kemi came home from school and asked, "Mommy, are you happy now?" Tammy paused for a moment, realizing that Kemi was starting to see the change in her. She smiled softly, ruffling Kemi's hair. "Oh, my dear, yes I am," she said. "I've learned that love isn't about holding on to the pain. Sometimes it's about moving forward, even when things don't go the way you want." Kemi nodded, her big eyes full of trust, and Tammy felt a surge of gratitude. She was grateful for the chance to live free of the hurt for herself and for Kemi. She knew that forgiving Bayo had been the hardest thing she had ever done, but in the end, it was the thing that allowed her to heal. And even though she would never forget the past, she could finally look ahead, ready to embrace whatever life had in store for her. Tammy and Kemi's life continued to change in ways she could never have imagined. Tammy watched as Kemi grew up, learning to face the world with courage, just like her mother. Tammy's new job afforded them the opportunity to move to a different neighborhood, one that was quieter and peaceful. Tammy found comfort in the simplicity of their new life. No more conflict, no more holding on to anger. She began to see the world with fresh eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin and the joy of small everyday moments. She learned to enjoy cooking again, to find peace in the sound of the wind through the trees, and to be content with the beauty of life's little surprises. Kemi blossomed into a happy, well-adjusted child. One evening, as Tammy was cooking, she received a call from a close friend, Doris, who invited her to a small gathering with friends. "Tammy, you should come. It's been ages since we had a good time." Tammy hesitated at first, but then she thought to herself, "Well, why not? There's no harm in going out." She finished cooking, dropped Kemi off with her elder sister, and got dressed in her simplest, most comfortable clothes and made her way to the gathering. As she walked in, she felt a sense of freedom, of having come so far from the person she once was. She was happy to meet old friends, people who had known her before she lost her marriage that drove her into hiding. They laughed and talked about old times, and for the first time in a long time, Tammy didn't feel the need to hold back. She was free, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Towards the end of the gathering, she caught the eyes of a man who had been staring at her with an intensity that made her feel both uncomfortable and curious. She recognized him immediately. Jide, an old friend from high school. As Jide approached her with a smile, Tammy's heart raced. Jide had always been kind, but they had lost touch years ago. Now, as they spoke, there was a spark between them. Something tender that reminded her of the love she had once known. She found herself looking forward to meet him again as they grew closer. They began dating, and soon, Tammy found herself feeling happy and peaceful around him. She recognized this feeling from the early days of her relationship with Bayo. It was as though she was rediscovering the joy of being in love again. Time passed, and Tammy and Jide's love deepened, and they got married. Jide was patient, kind, the kind of man who was always there for her, supporting her in ways she hadn't known before. Kemi loved Jide as well, seeing him as the father figure she had always needed. Tammy was finally living a life free from the shadows of the past. She still remembered Bayo, but her heart no longer carried the weight of resentment. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of anger. It was about freeing yourself to love again, to trust again. And now, with Jide by her side, Tammy felt safe. The road to get here had been long and painful, but it had shaped her into the woman she had become. And as she held Jide's hand, she felt a sense of peace knowing that this was her new beginning. She had been tested by pain and loss, but she had risen above it all. She was no longer the woman who had been consumed by bitterness and regret. Instead, she had become someone who understood the importance of love, forgiveness, and healing. She had learned that no matter how deep the wounds, there was always a way to heal, to rebuild, and to find happiness once again. The end.